switch orientation.
I did like one to the side.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to put the message up there. Should I put the message as a comment? I don't think so. I'm gonna post it just in case and then see if I can pin it. Yeah.
Where are you from originally? All over the place. That's great. You're here. But then
Are you just pushing like these two chairs back?
That's okay if those two aren't on this street. Well, one of them. Yes. Like, this is it. Wow. Yes. I just wish we could do something there in that spot. My next door neighbor was going to church on Sunday with his wife's car. Celebrate to go out to 17 the low side. Let's go through stop sign and sides right now. T-bone. So their car.
Oh, is it? Oh, yeah, maybe.
I'm good. Come
Unless they allow dogs, but I'm not taking a dog. The bingo, I love to attend. It's just nice neighbors.
Are you trying to keep these seats empty here? Or? How do you get it back to like?
But they're bold here. They know they can. Yes. When I was younger, I used to go to dance with my friends. They went to the
one of them will be
Oh, because when the lady at the grocery station
I think
then I just never opened it because she tied them off.
Just a crude example.
Yeah, I was telling you what, she needs a few weeks, a couple months, whatever. She's very much. I want to get them together. Yeah, I know.
Hello, everybody. Because of the accident on 17 and the traffic problem, we're going to start 5 minutes late. Okay, I hope you'll indulge us. You guys were here ahead of time, and that's great, but we still have people coming in for stuff. So it'll just, let's say we'll start about, 8 minutes after. Thanks so much.
I don't know, so that's why I asked. Oh, yeah.
There's one of our ladies who celebrated. We said we think she said she
And I was with another lady, and I just spent that day, and then I see her,
instant bond.
I see her time to time.
Yeah, I don't see her. This year, March or this year, I said, oh wow. Well,
maybe one of them.
driveway, and I had to do a shovel in the wintertime because my husband has heart problems. I can't get his lungs. So that big snow we had, every 4 hours I was out there, and he was playing driveway. I'd be stricken to the snow. But during the summer, I forgot to get outside. I think we had a house. He's from Maryland, I'm from DC. And then I used to have a South Point. Well, you go down to 18, you enter George, you pass the couch, you make the first right hand turn on past Matez. Pass Matez. Our front yard was not grass, so what I think the grass out here is 99.9% better than the quality we had from the front yard. All we had was room. Yeah, it was. He ran over the pond at the bottom of the yard. They never finished the ditches, so whenever it Golden Pond.
One of my favorite movies.
Yes. So we went to Willard.
Like another place brought up in the hills.
Yes, that'd be nice. There's a guy named Willard who has email free. It's on the site of Walmart. He gave us a big pillow. He said, I think it's going to die. Do your best. You should see the tree. It's as big as a house. A whole place. And we kept watching it because it was something that's on it. Because those love water. So we sent him to the show. We said, oh my goodness, as well. We've got a lot of water for it. Yeah, my daughter's rich.
I was like, look at all the gravel I know.
She died in 95 in a flash.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in your way.
My daughter's so I want to go see her. I can take the bus her
I'll go south. Do you guys have a neighbor next to you sitting there? No? Alright, I'll sit by you.
Like, I don't think it's a Oh, let me tell you.
I know.
There was a place called Post there in the corner.
That's like this crowd.
This guy, what's your home number? He goes, home number. No, what's your real home number?
I said that backwards. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, yeah. But I don't. Oh, there she is. Yeah, it was Let me go. I'll be right back.
Thank you.
No, I didn't know what the other guy was. I don't forget.
You sure it's okay to wear it?
Hello, and thanks so much for joining us for this Senate of Virginia debate. We will have an opportunity to thank, first of all, our the candidates who agreed to participate. We also thank our co-sponsors. This debate is sponsored by the Student Government Association of Mary Washington, the College Republicans, and the Young Democrats of Mary Washington. We also are co-sponsored with the Freelance Star, the Fredericksburg Area Chamber of Commerce, and the League of Women Voters of the Fredericksburg region. So thanks to all of the sponsors who made this work. I also have to specifically thank the students who are helping. They're collecting index cards. They're working with the timekeeping as well. So this is very much a Mary Washington event. I also want to draw your attention to 3 other debates that we're going to be having for the other Fredericksburg area Senate seat and for the 2 House districts that include the Fredericksburg area. The 28th district, our debate will be on September 18th. The 88th district will be on September 20th, and the Senate 17th district will be October 29th. And all of these will be at Mary Washington on the Fredericksburg campus. Just a few general rules to mention so that people understand how this is going to work. The opening statements will be 2 minutes each, and the order was selected at random. The closing statement will also be 2 minutes, and then there will be questions that are being asked during the an hour or so that we'll be asking questions, and I'm going to be submitting questions to the candidates that were from the audience submitted by you all ahead of time. The questions will be offered by Barbara Hollingsworth, the editorial page editor of Freelance Star, and by Ted Schubel of WFVA, right? Yeah, WFVA Radio. He's a local institution. I feel like he's on every radio station in Fredericksburg. But the other thing I would mention is the way that this would work is when a question is asked of a candidate, they will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will have 1 minute by way of response, and there's a 30-second rebuttal option if the candidate who spoke first wishes to offer a rebuttal. The way that we'll do this is that there'll be an even number of questions where each candidate goes first, and that's why I'm saying roughly an hour. And so with that, we have our candidates here to speak first. We have Mr. Rashid goes first, followed by Mr. Stuart, and then it'll alternate. So Mr. Rashid will have the first opening statement. He will also be asked the first question, which will be asked by Barbara Hollingsworth. So with that, everyone has seen the signs for the 60 seconds left, the 30 seconds left, and the 0 seconds left. So with that, we should be ready to go. Thank you all for your help with this. So now, Mr. Rashid, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Qasim Rashid. I'm the Democratic nominee for Virginia State Senate 28th District. My story in Virginia begins 32 years ago when my family and I migrated here from Pakistan. We left a country that was established on many of the same principles that the United States was established. Religious freedom, racial justice, gender equality. Tragically, it's deteriorated into something not any of those things. My family came here in search of what many consider cliche, the American dream. And we came into a country with a new culture, a new language. You know, my parents are teachers, and they weren't ready to just let us capitulate. They encouraged us and pushed us. And if I'm honest, there was a struggle for us. I remember living in Section 8 housing. I remember living off of SNAP and TANF food stamps. I remember working since I was 15 years old, walking home from the grocery store where I worked at 11 p.m. at night after high school because we needed to make ends meet. I had a life-changing moment about 12 years ago when my wife and I got married, and she encouraged me to go to law school. And it was in law school where I truly found my calling as a human rights lawyer. And in my work as a human rights attorney, I've worked to support women who are survivors of domestic and sexual violence. I've worked within the criminal justice system to reform incarcerated individuals and make them more successful returning citizens. I've worked with nonprofits to advance healthcare and education. And at a certain point, when I realized that I needed to run for office, I did what any self-respecting man would do. I went to my wife and I asked her permission to let me run for office. I'm here because this country has given me so much. My brother is a U.S. Marine, I'm a human rights lawyer, and my younger brother and sister are successful in the business world. And what I bring to you is my experience based on advocacy and fighting for working families. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Richard Stuart, and I represent the 28th District in the Senate of Virginia. I'm running for re-election, and I hope that I can earn your support. Most of my life, or at least most of my adult life, has been spent in public service, either serving as a United States Marine, as a Commonwealth's attorney, or as your state senator. I was raised to believe in service to the community and service to our country. When I started this course some years ago, we promised you that we would focus on making our community a better place to live, work, and raise a family, and that is what I've done every step of the way. It's what I've focused on. It's the principles that have guided me as your state senator, because I understand that I work for you. And it's my responsibility and it's my job to advocate for you in Richmond and elsewhere to improve our quality of life. And in doing that, in the time in the state senate that I've spent, I've passed over 140 bills directed towards making our quality of life better in this community. And those are only the bills that had my name alone on it. Those aren't the bills that I worked with Democratic senators and Republican senators, collaborated with to get other bills passed, which are many, many, many more. And those were bills that were signed largely by Democratic governors. I focused on things like transportation funding, congestion relief, trying to dedicate the internet sales tax to build more roads, and using our shoulders as lanes during peak travel times so that you can get home to your child's baseball game or dance recital or whatever it is you need to get home for. I focused on keeping your taxes low, and this year I'm excited to tell you that we passed a budget that gives $1 billion in tax relief back to you, the citizens of Virginia, and if you pay taxes, you're going to get a check very shortly. I see my time is up. Thank you all very much. In order to maximize the amount of time the candidates have to talk about their policies, we, the candidates and the organizers of this debate, agreed that after the applause for the opening statements, there would not be applause again until the closing statements. So that'll maximize the amount of time that people have to be heard. And so this is part of the conditions that both campaigns accepted as we organized our event. We now turn to Barbara with the first question from Mr. Rashid. And you'll have 2 minutes to answer, 1 minute to respond. I think it's on.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rashid, one of the issues that affects everyone in the Fredericksburg region, which is not partisan, is our terrible transportation problems. According to the Fredericksburg Chamber of Commerce, we have $4 billion worth of critical needs in this area and with no funding to meet them. What is your plan for helping to get more money for transportation in this area?
Thank you for that question. I think first we need to look at the fact that we didn't get into this mess by accident. Unfortunately, the policies of a GOP-led legislature over the last 10 to 15 years have caused the problems that we're in right now. So we can talk all we want about the work that has been done. It's been insufficient, and over the last 10 to 12 years, traffic has increasingly gotten worse. The first thing I would do is what I'm already doing. I will not accept money from the property developers who build and build and build without any regard for the roads, for the infrastructure, and for the extra burden they're putting on us as parents, as teachers, as firefighters, as policemen. My campaign is a people-powered campaign because I want to be accountable to people only. The second thing we should do is remember that we can't keep building our way out of this. And so that includes incentivizing businesses and drawing businesses back to Stafford, back to the Fredericksburg region, so that people aren't having to commute an hour and a half, 2 hours to Washington, D.C. in the first place. And this is particularly felt when I've spoken to people in Westmoreland and King George, that their young people will go to college and then they won't come back because there aren't any job opportunities. Third, I would also focus on encouraging businesses to invest more in telecommunication options as well. By telecommuting, again, we're getting more cars off the road. I think these aspects in and of themselves will allow us to decrease congestion without even having to worry about getting more money. But where should that money come from? I want to tax not the middle class, not the lower income class, but I want to tax the mega corporations who are making billions in profits and not paying their fair share. They need to be accountable to us, the public. If we do those things successfully, I believe we can resolve these issues in the next coming years.
Thank you. Probably one of the biggest issues we face in this region, and so I've worked on this for quite a number of years. One of the bills I put in was tax incentives to try to get businesses up north to locate satellite facilities down here. And the problem was I took on Fairfax County in Northern Virginia, and they've got more votes than we did. But it's a really good idea in trying to get them to locate those facilities here. Impact fees, because when developers develop, and if the locality doesn't go through a rezoning, they don't get any proffers. And so you've got all this buy right development, you've got all these stale lots that are already out there, and you get nothing for infrastructure, for police, for fire, for rescue, for anything. I have 2 impact fees before the Virginia Senate right now that addresses that. And it would require them to pay across the board for any kind of development, regardless of whether it was rezoned or not. It's being studied in the Housing Commission as we speak. I fought to get the shoulders on I-95 used as lanes during peak travel times. It was in the 6-year plan, and I don't know why, but under the McAuliffe administration, it was removed from the 6-year plan, but it's getting back on there. And working with Governor Northam and Secretary Valentine, we're hoping that we're going to build those as early as next year so you can use those shoulders as access lanes. The internet sales tax is something that we're collecting now as a result of the Wayfair decision in the United States Supreme Court. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. It's going into the general fund of the Virginia General Assembly, not specific for anything. I put in a bill last year to direct all of that money to transportation. And there were like 5 people who said, well, that's a good idea. The bill didn't pass. But at the end of the session, I had 15 people who said it was a good idea. And that's actually how you legislate. Sometimes you have to bring things back year after year after year because you have to get a majority of 40 people and a majority of 100 people in the other body. The internet sales tax could be a huge boon for this area. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. My time is up. We'll get used to it. I got talking, I'm sorry.
I would just like to offer that actions speak louder than words. My opponent has been in this seat for 12 years. And in 2013, under a Republican governor, he voted against expanding the highways to include the highlands. And again, whatever is being advocated right now, I believe should be compared to what has actually been done. And under a GOP-led legislature, that is what's gotten us into the mess. It is time for us to have a change with more forward-thinking leadership going forward.
The next question goes first to Mr. Stuart from 10. Senator Stuart, on the Equal Rights Amendment, your thoughts on the Equal Rights Amendment? Should it be ratified?
Sure.
Yes, with a caveat, with abortion-neutral language. I voted for that in the past because I believe in equal rights for everybody. The reality of the ERA is this: it's incapable of being ratified by the United States Congress and the Constitution. So what it becomes is an ERA for Virginia, the Equal Rights Amendment for Virginia. Folks in the Senate tried to introduce abortion-neutral language into that this year, and the Lieutenant Governor cut off debate. And I voted against it. I really don't like it when people cut off debate, because we are elected to go there to represent the folks who sent us there. When they don't let us debate the issue, they're shortchanging everybody in this room. The real issue has come up with the ERA is this: it's not so much about equal rights, it's about taxpayer-funded abortion. New Mexico has seen this, Pennsylvania has seen this through federal legislation, but I support equal rights for everybody, and if we could get abortion-neutral language into the ERA, I would vote for it.
1 minute.
Yes. The idea that we need abortion-neutral language is a red herring. 37 states have already ratified the ERA when this issue didn't come up, because it is a new issue concocted as an excuse to deny equal rights to women. If you read the 25 words of the amendment or so, it doesn't mention abortion. It just simply says that there shall be no discrimination on the basis of sex. Now, my opponent is, again, his words are that he believes in equal rights for everyone, but from 2010 through this current assembly, he has consistently voted against legislation that would ban discrimination for women and for the LGBTQ community. So I respect what he's saying right now, but I'm frankly disappointed because the actions have indicated a consistent pattern of discriminating women and the LGBTQ community, and most recently with the ERA. Fun fact, the final straw that broke the camel's back of why I decided to ask my wife permission to run for office was because my senator promised to vote for the ERA and then voted against it. I said, enough is enough, we need to move forward with progress.
Actually, I voted for the ERA the year before last, and you can go and look at it. It was when I discovered that this was an end run for taxpayer-funded abortion that I said, I'm not going to vote for it. And when they cut off the debate in the Virginia Senate, the Lieutenant Governor said, there is no debate on this issue. Of course I wasn't going to vote for it. And if the abortion, taxpayer-funded abortion issue is such a red herring, why won't the Democrats agree to it? We could put this issue to rest and we could pass it. So I take issue with that. I've not voted consistently to discriminate against anyone. The only thing that I've voted against is the marriage amendment, because I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. You look at my other votes for the LGBT community, I vote to give everybody equal rights.
The next question comes from the audience, and it goes first. And it goes first to Mr. Rashid. How do we increase access and affordability of health care in Virginia?
Well, for starters, you don't strip 312,000 Virginians who have now signed up for Medicaid expansion. Led by Democrats, we finally and thankfully expanded healthcare access to lower-income Virginians. And now over 300,000 Virginians have access to healthcare, whereas they didn't before. You know, I spent some time going to the Moss Clinic right around the corner from here. And I said, in one word, what would happen if my opponent was reelected and fulfilled the Republican promise to repeal Medicaid expansion? I said it would be devastating. It would be devastating to hundreds of thousands of Virginians. My responsibility as a public servant is to look at the needs of my neighbors and act upon what they have asked us to do. The vast majority, 76%, according to a Mary Washington poll, say that Virginians want to expand healthcare access. They want to expand Medicaid access. So any candidate or politician who tells you that we need to repeal it is arguing for the minority. It's an extreme position to strip people of healthcare. I believe healthcare is a human right, and I believe that we must continue to work through new and innovative ways to advance that. Now, how we do that, that's a robust discussion that we should have. There's no one simple solution. But I think what we need to look at is what party has been trying to expand healthcare and which party has been trying to strip it away without any kind of replacement whatsoever. The Democratic Party has been working aggressively to expand healthcare access, and that's why we were able to expand Medicaid over this last term. And now there's an effort by the right to implement a work requirement, implement other restrictions that would ultimately strip healthcare away, causing people to die. And that is what the information has shown. Those states that delayed in expanding healthcare had higher maternal fatality rates, had higher infant fatality rates, and had higher fatality rates, period. Enough, we need to ensure healthcare is a human right.
The situation we find ourselves in is largely due to the Affordable Care Act, and that's the truth. There are certain things that we can do under the Affordable Care Act to make it better for the people of Virginia. That is pool insurance. You get bigger groups of people together. You can buy health insurance at a much cheaper cost. There are short-term policies that you can renew and never lose coverage for pre-existing conditions. And there are also things called catastrophic plans, which are the bare minimum plans, and they affect you most if you have a catastrophic event. We, as a team, passed all of those initiatives this year in the General Assembly, and unfortunately, our governor vetoed those. And I will tell you, those bills all passed with Democratic support. The issue of Medicaid expansion is this. You are dramatically raising the cost of health care for everyone in Virginia to serve a small population. And Medicaid was never designed to be a health plan. It was designed to be a safety net. And there are better ways we can do it. When you drive up the cost of health care for everyone in Virginia to serve a few, you're doing an injustice. We need to find a way, and we need to work towards what things that we have done in the General Assembly that the governor vetoed, to drive the cost of health care down for everyone so we can afford it.
Unfortunately, my opponent has shared some misinformation. First of all, this has nothing to do with the ACA. This was an election by the state of Virginia to expand Medicaid. Second of all, there's no increase in healthcare costs due to Medicaid expansion. That's again demonizing the poor. If anything, it's brought down costs because now we have fewer ER visits. And finally, again, actions speak louder than words. If you look at my opponent's record, and we're sharing it on our social media, he has repeatedly voted for plans that would exclude people with pre-existing conditions. That can't happen. We must protect healthcare as a human right.
The next question goes to Mr. Stuart.
Senator Stuart, the special session that was called by Governor Northam on gun control was very contentious and short, and people are still wondering why nothing was done about gun control. On the one hand, the Supreme Court's Heller decision reaffirmed that weapons, quote, in common use by law-abiding citizens are constitutionally protected, but at the same time they're allow the states to regulate weapons. Is there any way to rectify this situation where the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens are upheld while certain measures are taken to prevent people from getting guns who shouldn't have them?
The short answer to that is yes. We've got to protect people's due process rights while at the same time getting those folks that shouldn't have guns. The bill that I put in, which will come up shortly, is a bill that creates a statewide hotline. And the commonality between all of these mass shootings is someone knew, someone suspected that someone was going to do something wrong. They were going to snap and they were going to hurt people. And so my bill would create a hotline that allows you to call a central location. You would then dispatch either a psychiatrist with investigative experience or an investigator with psychiatric experience who could go and try to help that person, while at the same time preserving that person's due process rights, not taking them away. Not a red flag law where you kick down their door and go in their home because there's been some bare allegation against a person, but a thoughtful process where we could actually help people and try to stop them before they commit these acts. The Crime Commission is one of the best agencies we have in the state of Virginia, with some pretty significant experts who are working on this. And I think everybody believed that it was prudent to let the Crime Commission review these bills, think through it, and then come back with recommendations. It's not an easy thing to solve, or it would have been solved long before now. A lot of these ideas that people want, they want to take away your due process of law. These were things that our founding fathers gave us because of tragedies that occurred as a result of the king, and they learned. And we need to preserve our due process and our constitutional rights at all costs. And I want to respond real briefly to Medicaid expansion driving down cost. Who do you think's paying for Medicaid expansion? The hospitals are being taxed. Who do you think's paying the tax? You are. It didn't drive the cost down, it drove the cost up. That's why your premiums continue to increase.
All right.
I'm going to quote a state senator to start, who said that when you don't let us debate the issue, you're shortchanging everyone in the room. That was Senator Richard Stuart a few minutes ago. But when it came to the July 9th debate on guns, he refused to let anyone debate the issue, and he shortchanged all of us in this room, all of us in Virginia, and that's a fact. The reality is that to demonize those who suffer from mental illness is simply wrong. According to the Mental Health Council Association, less than 3% of violent crimes are committed by people who struggle with mental health. The reality is that we need comprehensive and responsible gun reform that reflects the will of the people. 93% of Americans, Republicans and Democrats, want universal background checks. If we had a universal background check, the Odessa mass shooting would not have happened just last week. 80% want red flag laws. 82% want us to ensure that we have a license to buy a gun. My opponent has voted against every single one of these common sense measures, and when it came time to debate them, he adjourned the session, shortchanging all of us. That's unacceptable.
We sent the bills to a highly qualified commission with experts to examine these bills, make findings, and report back to the General Assembly, and then we will have the debate. And that's the action we took, and I think it was a very prudent action to take. Universal background checks. We have background checks in Virginia. My opponent has told everyone that I oppose background checks, and it's simply not true. We have background checks in Virginia. What some folks want is background checks between private citizens, so that if I were to give my nephew a hunting gun that I don't use anymore, we'd have to go get a background check. Well, the reality of it is, how many criminals or people who intend ill will would actually go get a background check to do that? So what have you accomplished? It's a farce that's being submitted to the public, to some people, to try to make them think they're doing something when it actually wouldn't do a thing. That's the truth.
The next question is from Ted. It's for Mr. Rashid, and I just remind the candidates of the timers and the signs for the time for the segments. Thank you.
On the issue of the minimum wage, what do you favor?
On minimum wage, I favor what 74% of Virginians favor, according to a recent Virginia pilot poll, and that is that we must increase the minimum wage. We must increase the living wage. My opponent has repeatedly voted against increasing the minimum wage, and guess what? $7.25 an hour? How many counties are there in Virginia where you can get an apartment? 0. If you and your spouse are both married and working a full-time job, how many apartments can you get in Virginia? 0. It is an absolute poverty wage. And the myth that raising the minimum wage will hurt business is simply not supported by the facts. I can give you many great examples of this, but the most recent one is from the great state of Minnesota, when Governor Dayton, who by the way is a billionaire, inherited a $5 billion deficit. He came in, raised the minimum wage, increased taxes on corporations, and increased taxes on those who were in the top 1%. And what happened? By the time he left, that $5 billion deficit became a $1 billion surplus. Nearly 7,000 more Minnesotans entered the top income bracket, and 0 businesses left. And Minnesota became the 5th fastest growing economy in the entire state, ending up with a $1 billion surplus. Virginia is #1 for business, but dead last for workers' rights. That's not by accident. That's by creating a systemic model where we continue to give tax breaks to the top 1%, to these mega corporations, and they reward candidates by funding their re-election. Meanwhile, 1 in 9 Virginians are going hungry, our teachers are horribly underpaid, our police officers, our firefighters are underpaid, and then we make excuses as to why are there people on welfare? Well, because we're forcing them onto welfare by denying them a living wage. So on this, I take the view of the majority of Virginians. 3/4 of Virginians agree we must increase the minimum wage. A living wage is a human right, and that is what I will fight for when I understand.
I dispute the Minnesota analogy, quite frankly. I won't get into that. And I dispute the assertion that Virginia workers are last. We are #1 in business, and I'm proud of that. I've worked hard to enact policies that made us #1 in business. And if you actually look at the statistics from the Department of Labor, they say workers are in the top 10 in Virginia. And I think that's pretty darn good. We can always work on more to improve things. But for the government to supplant its judgment in place of business is flat out wrong. For the government to pick winners and losers in our society is flat out wrong. And that's what happened when the government says to business, you must do this. So what happens if a business has a budget and they can hire 10 people at $10 an hour? And you say you've got to pay them 15, which is what I think my opponent wants. Do we then lose 5 jobs of those people? Is that what happens? Why should we ever say the government should pick winners and losers? It's a bad idea.
Well, respectfully, the government already does pick winners and losers. They pick winners and losers when they give mega corporations massive tax breaks. They pick winners and losers like when my opponent voted to give a massive tax break to millionaires with massive boats while he owned a massive boat, but not tax breaks to people who own small boats. So let's dismiss this farce that the government doesn't pick winners and losers. All we're asking for as working class people and fighting for working families is let's just have a level playing field so that because corporations don't pay their people enough, they're working a full-time job and still on welfare. That is picking losers, and that's wrong.
This question is an audience question. It goes first to Mr. Stuart. Do you support any changes in state law that would encourage more voter participation, longer hours, more sites for early voting, or anything along those lines? And if so, would you describe the changes you'd be willing to support to increase voter participation?
Yes. Sorry. Actually, this year, I put in a bill that was just excuse-free voting. It's not even absentee voting. It was, if you're entitled to vote in Virginia, you can go up to 30 days prior, and I wanted them to stay open on weekends and vote. You didn't have to give an excuse like you do on an absentee ballot, because frankly, I don't know why I should have to tell the government that I'm going out of town or I need to do something else in order to vote absentee. It's really none of their business. And so my bill said you can vote up to 30 days in advance of the election at the registrar's office, and you don't have to even make an excuse for doing it. The bill didn't pass, unfortunately, and I will tell you that was bipartisan. I wish I could have gotten more support from both sides for that bill, because I believe that's what we should do. We should make it easy for people to vote and to participate in our democracy.
I commend the senator on the 30-day no excuse. I want to give credit where due. I think that's a beautiful thing. Unfortunately, again, I'm going to ask you to look at actions, because actions speak louder than words. In 2013 and in 2017, my opponent introduced a voter ID law that many describe as very similar to the president's mythical claim that 3 million people illegally voted. But, the statistics are that in the last decade, there have been only 91 cases of actual voter fraud. That's 0.004%. And yet he spent money on this. But I think the most remarkable thing about the Republican agenda that just leaves me mind-boggling is that last year they passed legislation to return the right to own a firearm to former felons. So they believe that a felon can be rehabilitated to own a firearm. But when it came to passing legislation to return voting rights to former felons, it died in committee. How about that? You can be rehabilitated to own a firearm, but not to own, not to pass a vote. We need to reform this and ensure every person has equal access to voting.
I don't ever recall introducing a voter ID bill. I've introduced so many bills, as I said, I've passed 140 in my name alone, so it's certainly not impossible. I do recall voting for a voter ID bill, and I do very firmly believe that you should have to show some form of identification before you vote. You have to show a form of identification to do anything in our society. And it always interests me when folks say, well, there's just no voter fraud. Well, the interesting thing is, how do you catch them if you don't know who they were? And so people commit voter fraud in every election, and we know it's a serious issue, but you can't catch them because there's no ID to identify them with. If we required people to have identification to vote, it would end the debate and the entire discussion.
The next question is from Barbara for Mr. Rashid.
Mr. Rashid, one of your tweets under hashtag cancel my debt was concerning the amount of money that you had borrowed to attend law school, and I'm quoting, students are forced to take high debt and borrow at 7 to 8%. I'm running for office to fight this injustice, unquote. Who forced you to take on, I guess it was $180,000 in debt to attend law school, and don't you think it would be an injustice to people who have paid their own way or their children's way in college to be asked to foot the bill for other people?
Wonderful question. I'm so glad this came up. We live in a society where, as my opponent said, the government doesn't get to pick winners and losers, but they already have. The current student loan debt is about $1.6 trillion. And the mere idea of canceling that raises people in alarm that isn't that unfair? Isn't that unfair? Isn't that wrong? Well, my response is very simply, no, it's not. And here's why. Since the 1970s, the government has bailed out banks and Wall Street and corporations to the tune of over $10 trillion. $10 trillion, think about that. Meanwhile, when the government loans these corporations money to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars, they do so at 0% or 1% interest. But when it comes to our next generation of the middle class, they do it at 6 to 7%, 8% interest. The government is picking winners and losers, and the winners are those who are already extraordinarily wealthy, and the losers are those who are desperately trying and clawing to get up to the middle class. Unfortunately, this policy has been devastating to the United States. In the 1960s, under a Republican administration, when the marginal tax rate on the wealthy was over 90%, the middle class represented 2/3 of America. Now, as we continue to shave and cut taxes for the wealthy and raise them on the middle class is now only about 40%. We have more wealth inequality today in September of 2019 than we had in September of 1929, right before the Great Depression. So the idea that this is unjust is, I think, a false proposition. The reality is if the government can bail out megacorporations to the tune of $10 trillion, and they keep making the same mistake over and over again, they can most certainly help their middle class and a fraction of that to ensure that we strengthen our economy going forward.
When I was a child, I was taught that your word means something. And when you make a commitment, you have to honor that commitment. When you borrow money to go to school, college, law school, you're making a commitment to pay that money back. And then to turn around and say, I shouldn't have to pay that back, every other taxpayer in the state or the country should, just because, is flat wrong. You make a conscious decision to borrow that money. In life, we all have to learn early on that our choices have consequences, and you've got to be responsible for those consequences. And you talk about bailing out mega corporations in Wall Street. The government doesn't bail out anybody. It's the taxpayers of the state and the country that have to pay these bills, and the government shouldn't be using the taxpayers' money to bail out anyone or to cancel anyone's debt. It's simply wrong.
I'm sorry, we don't allow questions from the audience. You had the opportunity to participate by offering an index card suggestion. You can speak to the candidates after the debate. There's another 30 seconds from Mr. Rashid.
Sure. Again, you know, I would just ask you to look at the senator's record. He says one thing, but in 2015, he helped pass legislation that would exempt Dominion from having to pay back by charging us extra fees. Well, guess what? Lo and behold, the SEC has now reported that Dominion overcharged us $277 million out of our pockets. And because of the legislation that our senator helped pass to protect them, they have to pay back zero. So, you know, it's easy to say one thing, but holding fast to that with your actions is a very different conversation.
The next question goes to Mr. Stuart, and it's from Ted.
Senator, what can be done to hold down rising tuition at Virginia's four-year colleges and universities?
Sorry. Having a little difficulty operating this thing. So I put in a crazy bill this year. And what that bill said was, because I was pretty frustrated with how the public universities were raising tuition rates. And what that bill said was, if you want to raise tuition at a Virginia Public University, you've got to get a two-thirds majority rate vote by referendum from the student body of that university. And the university presidents and the boards of trustees did not like that bill. And that bill did not pass. But I argued with them and debated with them. We send young people to university to become part of a democratic society, to learn, to think, to function in our community as productive citizens. Why shouldn't we have to convince them that the tuition needs to be raised? The bill didn't pass, but what came as a result of that was we got public, they now have to listen to students and parents at a public meeting, the boards of trustees, before they raise tuition rates, and we got more money in the budget to freeze college tuition rates for the next 2 years. Do I have more time? I want to correct one thing Mr. Rashid said. I voted against this last Dominion bill, which allowed them to keep that money. That should not have ever occurred. All the profits that they did not earn, I was one of the strongest voices against it, and I'm happy to get the record of that. They did not earn that money. It was done through a rate freeze a few years ago. We actually had the bill this past session before last, which allowed them to keep all that money and then reinvest a bunch of money in infrastructure. And what I said from the very beginning was, I'm not going to support anything that allows you to keep profits you did not earn. Give that money back to the people of Virginia, and then if you want to go before the SEC and put in a rider to try to put the money into infrastructure, I will support that. They wouldn't do it that way, so I voted against the bill, and he's flat wrong and misrepresenting my record.
Well, again, we can look at the 2015 bill that Senator Stuart supported that allowed them to keep the extra $277 million. This is not an opinion, it's on the record. We'll tweet it out on our social media as well so you can see it for yourself. And I actually agree with Senator Stuart. Why should we be punishing our young people simply for the crime of getting a higher education? I wish that same sentiment was there when my generation was going to college and law school, and we saw tuition rates far exceed the cost of actual living. And so to answer the question, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to work with the federal government to ensure that the government isn't simply writing a blank check to universities. They offer loans because they didn't want anyone unable to go to college because they couldn't afford it. The regulation that didn't happen, that should have happened, was to ensure universities were held accountable to explain why they need to raise their tuition rates by 5-10% every single year. And as far as asking a student body for a two-thirds majority, I think that's a good idea. So I mean, again, I'm giving credit where due. I think that's a fantastic idea. I'd love to see that happen.
2015 bill for Dominion was a rate freeze bill based upon the projections by the EPA of not being able to burn coal for electricity. That didn't allow them to keep anything. It froze rates in place. The 2018 bill is what allowed them to keep the profits from that rate freeze that they otherwise did not earn, that they said they were going to put into our infrastructure to beef up the grid. Go look it up. I voted against that bill.
This question is another audience question. It goes first to Mr. Rashid. The questioner asks, what are your views on immigration? What immigration policies do you think make the most sense?
Well, I'm an immigrant to this country. I'm grateful for this country's welcomingness, its beauty. My brother is a U.S. Marine veteran, and he said he didn't really feel like a citizen until the day he graduated from boot camp. So I believe that our country should continue to live the way it has for centuries and be a nation of immigrants. Be a nation that finds it easier for people to immigrate. Now, my opponent has accused me of wanting open borders. This is unfortunately a lie. I've never advocated for open borders. I'm an immigration attorney. I work with people to help them navigate the very complex immigration process. Unfortunately, the federal government has made it increasingly difficult by raising fees, by passing arbitrary bans that have no rhyme or reason. And my opponent, he's taken it off his website now, but up until a few months ago, he wanted to force local police to work with ICE to raid immigrant homes. Now, I've spoken to two sheriffs, the sheriff of Stafford County, Sheriff Decatur, and Sheriff Dempsey of King George County, and both of them disagree with this notion. And it's quite obvious why. We need local police to work on local issues. We should not be raiding people without due process of law. We should not be doing this, period. So I would like to see an immigration system that continues to thrive based on what made this country what it is, a nation of immigrants, where we make it easier to immigrate, follow through with the due process of law. And finally, I'll say this, that one of the horrifying things this current administration has done is deny the human right of asylum. Understand something. People who seek asylum are not doing it because they feel like it. They're doing it because their lives are in danger. And to deny this basic human right stands against everything that makes this country the beautiful country that it is. I think this is an opportunity for us to reflect, think about what has made us stronger, and recognize that far from doing things like increasing crime or hurting the economy, immigrants have lower crime rates and massively boost the economy. That's what we should encourage.
I believe we need a legal immigration policy that allows people to immigrate to this country. I do not believe that we should harbor illegal immigrants. I do not believe in sanctuary cities. I think that undermines everything we stand for. So we disagree on this issue. I do believe that we should cooperate with ICE. I was a Commonwealth's attorney. I prosecuted people for a period in my life. And unfortunately, I had to deal with some pretty tough characters. And I cooperated with ICE to the extent that we needed to, and we all should. There are numbers of cases where people who are here illegally have murdered, raped, robbed citizens of this country, and it should not have been allowed to happen. But I also agree that we've got to have an immigration system that works, and we don't currently have it now. And so I hope that Congress can come up with something that works. We need folks that want to be here, that are willing to be productive citizens, that are willing to pay taxes and be part of the community, but it's got to be done in a legal way.
I'll simply add that this demonization of immigrants by looking at the vast minority that commit violent crimes, no one is defending them. No one. I've yet to hear anybody defend these folks. The reality is that immigrants and even undocumented immigrants commit far fewer crimes than U.S. citizens. And when we talk about asylum hearings, especially when they're afforded a representative, a counselor, there's nearly a 98% appearance rate, which is actually higher than the appearance rate for traffic court. So we need to find ways to strengthen our economy and our community with immigrants with compassion through action.
The next question is from Barbara and goes to Mr. Stuart.
Senator Stuart, the opioid crisis has decimated many many communities in Virginia and throughout the country. The federal government has just announced that they were going to give Virginia $20 million to fight this epidemic. What do you think is the best way to spend that money, and how would you do that without punishing people who are in pain and are sick and need these vital medications?
We've got to spend it through treatment and getting them off of this stuff. I've never seen anything like this in my entire life. And I think all of us have had friends that have died. I had a friend of mine that died from it about a month and a half ago, and nobody suspected it. He apparently got off on the stuff. He was arrested for driving under the influence of something that didn't know what it does, spent time in jail. He got all cleaned up. He was back to work. He was getting his life together again. And then what I understand happens is they fall off the wagon. They take the same dose that they did when they were actively taking it, and it killed him because his body couldn't tolerate it. It affects all walks of life. It affects people in every community. And I've never seen anything like it. It's a horrendous tragedy. We've got to get the money to treatment. We've also got to prosecute the dealers who are putting this stuff out. And I believe that we need to give immunity to people who are with others who get drugs from the dealer, particularly as an accommodation. And I'll give you an example. We passed a bill that I've worked on for the last 5 years this year, and the governor vetoed it. And what that bill allowed you to do is if 2 people were doing an opiate, and one of them died, then the other could, or was in distress, the other could call for help without fear of being charged for possession or anything else. And I don't know why the bill was, I can't speak to that, but we've got to get at those people that are selling it while at the same time give the treatment to others. I was aware of a young lady in Hanover County, and her mother came and testified on this particular issue. She was doing this with some other fellow. When she started having seizures and in distress, they put her in the closet. And they all left because they were afraid they were going to get in trouble. It is the most serious thing that I think I've dealt with in my time in the Senate, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We need to work on treatment. But again, I'm going to ask you to look at my opponent's record. As senator, he voted against decriminalizing even small amounts of marijuana and pot, holding those folks accountable. I mean, a small amount where they were just smoking it themselves, not distributing, not dealing. And that is one of the reasons why we also have a massive incarceration rate as well, due to something as simple as marijuana. Look, we're not going to arrest our way out of this. I've been spending my time meeting with the local sheriffs and asking them, what are your opinions? And they consistently agree that we need to stop making this a war on drugs and start investing in treatment. And guess what? With Medicaid expansion that the Democrats helped pass, now people have access where they didn't have it before. That's where all this stuff is intertwined. So when you deny health care to people, you also exacerbate the drug crisis and make it even worse. So I would ask you to look at actions and which party is actually working to ensure that those who are addicted are getting the treatment they need, not just thrown in prison.
Marijuana is still legal at the federal level. So again, it's a farce to decriminalize it in Virginia. And why do we tell people we're going to decriminalize something when they can still get a federal charge for it? And yes, I voted against it. And what I wanted to do was make a first offender program more significant so that if people get on drugs, we can help get them off. And I can assure you there are not many people going to jail for smoking marijuana in Virginia. It is a finable offense. There is a jail sentence after a certain period of time, but most are not doing it. Decriminalizing it and letting them do all the drugs they want is not the right thing. We need to get these folks help and get them off of these drugs.
The next question is from Ted, from Mr. Rashid.
On the issue of abortion, your thoughts on current abortion law and any changes, or what would you like to see?
On this issue of abortion, I trust women. This is a law that we have in Virginia that was passed actually by a Republican governor in the 1970s, and it's been the law for the last 40 years. I trust women. This is fundamentally what this comes down to. Do we trust women or not? I trust women to be most capable of making a decision, a very personal and intimate decision, with their physicians, and if they so choose, with their loved ones. If a woman has to make this decision or is put in this position, she should be in a room with her doctor, not with a senator in the legislative assembly. And I think that's fundamentally the question that we need to ask. If we trust women, then we ensure women have the resources available to them to make this decision. If we don't trust women, then we bring in big government and have government dictate what women should and shouldn't do. The reality is that according to numerous polls, what I'm saying is not the extreme view, it's actually the majority view. 72% of Virginians trust women and stand on this correct issue. So when we try to force the views of 28% on the majority, that's not a democracy. It tells us that we simply don't trust women, and that is inexcusable. And again, I'm going to point to my opponent's record. If his view really was that we need to somehow ban abortion, then he wouldn't have voted for a bipartisan bill in 2017 that would have guaranteed that insurance companies provide contraceptives to women for 12 months. Other states that have implemented this program have seen a 30% decrease in unwanted pregnancies and nearly a 50% decrease in abortions. So this is actually not about abortion, it's ultimately about trying to control women because the right doesn't trust women, and that's deeply troubling. 72% represents Republicans and Democrats. These are Virginians who trust women, I trust women, and that is how we should move forward on this issue.
I'm pro-life, and it's just that simple. And this was the most difficult year I think I've had in the Virginia Senate because the Democrats put in a bill to allow for abortions up to the time of birth. And it hurt me to my core, and I can't explain it any other way than that. That's what the bill said, that's what the bill would do, and it was unconscionable.
That's simply a lie. The bill that was passed in the 1970s, signed by the Republican governor, mandated that 3 physicians would have to sign off on an extreme situation where, due to the danger to the life of the mother or some other unpredictable situation, the bill that was introduced was to change that threshold from 3 physicians to 1 competent physician. That was really it. And if people have a problem with the bill, they should take it up with the Republican governor who signed it into law in 1975, not the Democrats.
The next question is another audience question, and it goes first to Mr. Stuart. Last February, the General Assembly took the first step towards ending gerrymandering in Virginia by passing the first read of a proposed constitutional amendment to establish a Virginia Redistricting Commission. Will you support passage of this amendment in the next session if you're elected?
Yes. I've supported every redistricting commission bill that we've had since I've been in the General Assembly. Because the 28 district seat is your seat. Not my seat, it's not his seat if he wins, it's the people's seat. And look at the 28 district now. It runs from the little town Montrose up to Gainesville. And it winds like a snake. And there's nobody in this room who can explain to me the communities of common interest, the contiguousness, or any of the things that qualify under the Constitution. In fact, there was a group called Virginia 2021 that sued over this last redistricting, and they sought to subpoena all of the information from a bunch of senators in the General Assembly, and every senator denied turning that information over except for me. And I work for the people. I believe in an impartial redistricting group. I turned over everything I had for them to see it voluntarily, and I hope that we can get this issue passed.
1 minute.
I won't need a minute. I agree with everything Senator Stuart said. I think it's unconscionable that we have districts where politicians choose their constituents as opposed to their constituents choosing their politicians. I wish we had the zeal in the General Assembly, and I'm calling out Republicans and Democrats back in 2011 when these horrible districts were made. If they were made with justice back then, we wouldn't be in this mess right now. But I commend the senator on working for a justice-based redistricting, and I look forward to ensuring that happens next year.
That concludes the questions that we're going to be asking the candidates tonight. In a moment, they will each have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Mr. Stuart will go first. Before I do that, though, I think it's incumbent upon me to thank the folks in the audience tonight for being as well behaved as you are. I think we have a lesson to show some of these people in national politics about the way we do things here in Virginia. Beyond that, I also want to thank our co-sponsors. We put these things together with a great deal of people very committed to the community, from the students at Mary Washington, the College Republicans, the Young Democrats, the Student Government Association, and special thanks to the 4 students who helped me tonight put this together: Samuel Hartz, Jesse Fitzgerald, Kate Seltzer, and Jeremy Engel. We also want to thank our partners at the Freelance Star, at the Chamber of Commerce, at the Area League of Women Voters. I want to thank my fellow panelists, Ted Schubel of WFVA and Barbara Hollingsworth, editorial page editor of the Freelance Star. But in addition to all these thanks, I really want to thank these candidates. I think that one of the things that you see as you watch politics is that this is not an easy thing to volunteer to do. There is a great deal of challenge that you face, and so for their willingness to put themselves forward and to run for office, I think they deserve a round of applause. On your way out, you can get campaign materials. There are tables in the back just outside the auditorium here. But with that, we will now move to 2-minute closing statements. Mr. Stuart, you go first.
Thank you, Dr. Farnsworth. And thank everybody from Mary Washington, the Freelance Star. I can't remember all the groups that he said, but I really appreciate you all putting this event on. I was telling Lisa when I came in the room, I know how much work it is to sponsor an event like this, and I really appreciate you all doing it and being willing to do it. And I really appreciate the fact that you all are willing to take your time and come out and listen. Listen, I know a lot of folks have made up their mind before they come in and they support their candidate, and that's fine. It's a wonderful thing that we live in a democratic society and we get to have a civil debate about the issues and the topics that care so much to the people in this district. And I'm just really appreciative that everybody came out, participated in it, and the groups put it on. And if I'm reelected, and I expect to be, I pledge to continue to work hard for you all to continue to improve our quality of life. Thank you all.
My story began 32 years ago, but it's just getting started. I've been a human rights lawyer for the better part of the last decade, fighting for marginalized communities, advocating for those who were left to the wayside, those who were denied a living wage, those who were incarcerated for a small amount of marijuana while somebody else walked free, those who were forced to pay higher taxes and higher rates while billionaires and millionaires got off scot-free, those who were denied an education while those of a wealthier class were afforded one, those who were denied health care while those of a wealthier class were afforded one. And for me, this is now taking my advocacy, my experiential learning, and turning it into policy. And the first thing we're doing is we are rejecting megacorp donations. Unlike my opponents, we don't accept money from megacorporations that are devastating our economy, suppressing a living wage, and preventing our economy from growing. In fact, I'm proud of the fact that we have more donors from Virginia in the last 4 months than my opponent has had in the last 4 years combined. We have more individual donors than any candidate in Virginia, Republican or Democrat, because we are fighting for working families. We're fighting for each and every single one of you. I'm proud of the fact that I have Democrats, Independents, and Republicans voting and donating to our campaign. You see, I believe that when we talk about the issues, we have to live our values. And until and unless we work together and look out for one another and respect each other. We don't even have to agree with one another, but we must respect one another. Until and unless we can do that, we cannot move forward as a country, and we cannot live up to the values and ideals of what this country was designed to be. Our preamble begins, we the people of the United States, not we the corporations of the United States. If elected, and I hope to be, I promise that I will always be accountable to you, the people. That is my life purpose, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks to everyone. Have a pleasant evening.
After that speech, I was fired.